They say money cannot buy love, but it possesses a strange, almost alchemical power, an ability to reveal the true price of a vow. It acts as a solvent, dissolving illusions, and exposing the raw, unvarnished truth of a person's character. Sometimes, the only way to truly know if you are loved for who you are is to present the perfect opportunity for betrayal, and then to simply watch. For Liam, this philosophical musing was about to become a harsh, cold reality written in the cold, blue light of a smartphone screen. The room was quiet, filled with the scent of expensive cologne and the pristine silence of a new beginning. His tuxedo, a masterpiece of tailored silk and wool, felt less like a groom's attire and more like a suit of armor for a battle he never anticipated. 3 hours. In just 3 hours, he was supposed to stand at the altar, waiting for Sarah, the woman who was his sun, his moon, his entire sky. But the sky had just fallen. The phone in his hand felt unnaturally heavy, a small tombstone marking the death of a future. He read the message again, and then a third time, not because he didn't understand, but because his mind refused to accept the finality of the words. "I'm sorry, Liam. I can't do this. I've met someone else. He can give me the life that I deserve. I wish you happiness." Happiness. The word was a mockery, a cruel twist of the knife. But as he stared at his reflection in the grand gold-framed mirror, he felt something unexpected. There was a brief, sharp sting of pain, a flash of heartbreak so intense it almost stole his breath. But then it was gone, replaced by an unnerving, absolute calm. His heart did not shatter into a million pieces. It froze, solidifying into a block of ice. The man looking back at him was not a jilted lover, drowning in sorrow. His eyes, usually warm and gentle, now held the cold, calculating glint of a predator. A plan, one that had been a distant, painful contingency, now clicked into place with terrifying precision. The wedding would not be canceled. The guests would not be sent home. The curtain would still rise. He straightened his tie, the motion slow and deliberate. The show would go on, but the script had been irrevocably changed. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips as he thought to himself, "The drama you craved, Sarah, the grand performance you dreamed of, you will have it. You just won't be the star. You will be the spectacle." To understand the depth of the betrayal, you must first understand the architecture of the lie it was built upon. Their love story, to the outside world, was a charming, modern fairy tale. Liam Peterson, at 32, was the quintessential good man. He was handsome, in a quiet, unassuming way, with a mind that moved faster than most people could follow, a trait he concealed behind a gentle demeanor and a simple lifestyle. He presented himself to the world as a senior software engineer for a mid-level tech firm, a stable, respectable career that afforded a comfortable, if not extravagant, life. He drove a 10-year-old sedan that was reliable, but would never turn ahead. He lived in a clean, modest apartment in a decent neighborhood, the kind of place young professionals rent before they can afford to buy. His wardrobe consisted of well-worn jeans, comfortable shirts, and a single, all-purpose suit for weddings and funerals. To the parents of any hopeful daughter, Liam was a perfect catch, dependable, intelligent, and kind. He was, in the words of Sarah's own mother, perfectly adequate. And in that phrase lay the first crack in the foundation. Sarah Vance, at 28, was radiant. She possessed a beauty that seemed both effortless and meticulously crafted. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a way of listening that made you feel like the most important person in the world. She worked in marketing, a job that suited her perfectly, allowing her to channel her ambition and charm into creating desirable narratives. When she met Liam, she was genuinely captivated by his quiet confidence and the steady warmth of his affection. He made her feel safe, cherished, and grounded. She loved the life they built, the cozy nights spent cooking together, the weekend trips to the countryside, the easy companionship. She loved Liam, or at least, she loved the version of love she understood, a version deeply entangled with security, comfort, and the promise of a stable future. The problem was that her definition of stable was constantly being revised upwards, influenced by the relentless whisper of her mother, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was a woman sculpted from ambition and disappointment. Married to a kind but financially unremarkable man, she had spent her life gazing over the fence at greener, more luxurious pastures. She channeled all of her unfulfilled desires for status and wealth into her beautiful daughter. Eleanor saw Sarah as her second chance, a vessel through which she could finally achieve the social standing she craved. From the moment Liam entered their lives, Eleanor's approval was a carefully measured, conditional thing. At family dinners, her compliments were always double-edged swords. "That's a lovely thought, Liam," she would say when he brought flowers, her eyes subtly flicking to the supermarket logo on the wrapping. "It's so wonderful that you're so practical with your money." She spoke of her friends' sons-in-law bankers, surgeons, entrepreneurs, not as a direct comparison, but as casual anecdotes dropped like poison into the conversation. Each story a glittering showcase of European vacations, luxury cars, and exclusive club memberships. Her favorite refrain, always delivered to Sarah in a conspiratorial whisper when Liam was out of earshot, was, "You deserve the best, my darling. The absolute best. Never settle." Liam was not blind. He was an observer by nature. His entire life, the one he presented to Sarah and her family, was a carefully constructed experiment. He wasn't just a software engineer. He was the anonymous founder and sole owner of Nexus Dynamics, a titan of the tech industry. He was the man the world knew only as Mr. Sterling. He had seen firsthand how the gravity of immense wealth warped people, turning friends into sycophants and lovers into opportunists. So he built a wall around his fortune, creating a separate, simple life to act as a filter, a way to find someone who would love Liam Peterson, the man, not Mr. Sterling, the myth. In the beginning, he believed he had found that in Sarah, but the signs, small and insidious, began to appear. He first noticed it with gifts. For her 27th birthday, he spent a month crafting a custom piece of software for her, a digital scrapbook that beautifully animated their entire relationship with photos, notes, and songs. It was a testament to his skill and his love. She was touched. She said all the right things, but he saw the faint, fleeting disappointment in her eyes. A week later, she was staring at a jewelry advertisement in a magazine, sighing over a diamond necklace that cost more than his car. "Isn't it divine?" she'd murmured. "Imagine wearing something like that." The comment was innocent on the surface, but to Liam, it was a subtle ledger entry, a quiet accounting of what he could not provide. Then came the questions about his career. They were always cleverly disguised as loving concern. "Honey, have you thought about moving into management? The engineers are brilliant, I know, but the real money is on the executive track. Or did you hear about Jennifer's husband? He just made partner at his law firm. They're buying a house by the lake. I'm so happy for them." Each question, each story, was a gentle nudge, a probe testing his ambition, his financial ceiling. He would offer placid, non-committal answers, watching as a shadow of frustration crossed her face before being replaced by a practiced, loving smile. The divide between their worlds became most apparent in their dreams for the future. When Liam spoke of the future, he talked of partnership, of raising children who were kind and curious, of growing old together. When Sarah spoke of the future, she spoke in brand names and square footage. She had binders filled with tear-outs from architectural magazines, showcasing sprawling mansions that a perfectly adequate software engineer could never afford. She talked about enrolling their hypothetical children in elite private schools and vacationing in street barts. Liam would listen, a quiet sadness settling in his chest as he realized she wasn't building a future with him. She was designing a lifestyle and trying to see if he could finance it. He was a component, not a partner. Despite it all, he held on to hope. He loved the woman she was, or at least, the woman he thought she could be, away from the toxic influence of her mother. He believed that the goodness he saw in her, the genuine affection in her quieter moments, could eventually win out over the creeping disease of materialism. So, he made a final, fateful decision. He decided to ask her to marry him. The proposal was, in his mind, the ultimate test. By offering her his entire, simple life, he was asking her to choose. To choose him, for everything he was, and for everything he was not. He bought a beautiful, elegant ring, one that was expensive for a man on his supposed salary, a stretch that signified his commitment. When he got down on one knee, and she tearfully said yes, a part of him felt a surge of triumphant joy. Perhaps his love was enough. Perhaps he had been wrong to doubt her. But another part of him, the cold, observant part that had made him a billionaire, knew that the test had not ended. It had just entered its final, most critical phase. The wedding preparations would be the crucible, and her answer, in the end, would not be the yes she whispered that day, but the choices she would make when she believed no one was watching. As Liam and Sarah began to plan their life together, an invisible yet immensely powerful figure entered their relationship. He was a ghost woven from headlines and speculation, a titan of industry whose presence began to occupy more space in the Vance household than Liam himself. His name, or rather his title, was Mr. Sterling. The world knew him as the founder of Nexus Dynamics, a company that had, in less than a decade, risen from obscurity to become a global behemoth. Nexus didn't just create products, it shaped the future. Its innovations in artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and quantum computing were the stuff of legend. But the man behind it all remained a complete enigma. There were no photographs of Mr. Sterling, no interviews, no public appearances. He was a phantom, a mastermind who communicated with the world only through the earth-shattering success of his company and the rare, ghost-written op-ed on the future of technology. This very mystery was the source of his power. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a myth, a symbol of ultimate, untouchable success. And for a woman like Eleanor Vance, he was a deity to be worshipped. The obsession began with a glossy business magazine left open on the coffee table. The cover featured a stark silver logo of Nexus Dynamics against a black background, with the headline, "The Sterling Touch, the Billionaire Ghost Who Owns the Future." Eleanor spoke of the article for weeks. She would read passages aloud at the dinner table, her voice filled with a reverence typically reserved for saints. "Listen to this, Sarah," she'd say, her eyes gleaming. "Analysts estimate Mr. Sterling's personal fortune to be in the 12 figures. 12. Can you even comprehend that kind of influence?" Liam would sit through these recitations, quietly eating his meal, offering a polite nod. The irony was so thick he could taste it. He had written the code for the primary algorithm being discussed in the article on his beat-up laptop, sitting on the very same couch Eleanor was now lounging on. Sarah, at first, treated it as one of her mother's fleeting obsessions, but the cult of Sterling was pervasive. His name was everywhere. Talk of Nexus Dynamics was inescapable. Slowly, insidiously, her mother's fascination began to infect her. She started picking up the magazines, her eyes lingering on the descriptions of the galas he sponsored but never attended, the superyachts he commissioned but was never seen on, the sprawling, secret estates he supposedly owned around the world. The fantasy began to take root. She and her mother would spend hours speculating. "I bet he's devastatingly handsome, but tragically scarred, which is why he hides," Eleanor would muse dramatically. "No," Sarah would counter, getting drawn into the game. "I think he's young, and a genius, and he just can't be bothered with the noise of the world." The image they built was a collage of every romantic hero and powerful tycoon they had ever read about. He became their personal Prince Charming, a figure of infinite potential. This fantasy became a weapon, and Liam was its primary target. The contrast between the mythical Mr. Sterling and the very real Liam Peterson was a constant, unspoken judgment. One evening, Liam came home, elated. He had solved a complex problem at work, a breakthrough that would earn him a respectable, 4-figure bonus. He told Sarah and her mother the good news, expecting to share a moment of celebration. Eleanor smiled her thin, polite smile. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear. Every little bit helps, doesn't it?" Then, without missing a beat, she tapped the newspaper on the table. "Speaking of bonuses, did you see that Mr. Sterling just donated $50 million to build a new university science wing? $50 million. He probably considers that pocket change. It's just wonderful what some people can do for the world." The air went out of the room. Liam's achievement was instantly rendered insignificant, a child's crayon drawing placed next to a Rembrandt. He saw the flicker of something in Sarah's eyes, not disappointment in him, not yet, but a wistful longing for the world her mother was describing. Liam began to feel like a visitor in his own life, an actor playing a part while the audience was dreaming of a different star. The situation reached a new level of absurdity during a weekend visit to a local winery. As they were tasting a Chardonnay, Eleanor sighed dramatically. "This is nice, but I was just reading that Mr. Sterling bought an entire vineyard in Napa Valley just to secure a specific grape for his private collection. Can you imagine? Owning the very land the wine comes from?" Later, Liam, who happened to own that very vineyard through a holding company, offered a detailed opinion on the wine they were drinking, noting its soil composition and aging process. Eleanor patted his hand condescendingly. "It's sweet that you have hobbies, Liam." Inside, Liam was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of him felt a bitter, cynical amusement. He was watching the woman he loved, and the woman who would be his mother-in-law, fantasize about him while simultaneously dismissing him. It was a farce of epic proportions. But beneath the amusement was a growing, desolate sadness. He was offering Sarah his most authentic self, a man stripped of all wealth and status, and he was watching her slowly, surely, rejected in favor of a glittering illusion. He wasn't just being overlooked, his entire value system was being held in contempt. His belief in humility, in quiet work, in love that transcended material wealth, all of it was being treated as a quaint, but ultimately limiting, character flaw. He stopped seeing it as a test and began seeing it as a diagnosis. He was observing the symptoms of a sickness of the soul, a deep-seated greed that his love alone could not cure. The shadow of Mr. Sterling was no longer just a topic of conversation. It was a phantom that now followed them everywhere, a constant reminder to Sarah of the life she wasn't living, and a constant confirmation to Liam of the truth he had been so desperate to avoid. The engagement ring on her finger was a promise to Liam Peterson, but her heart was beginning to wander, chasing a ghost. Hope is a stubborn thing, and even in the face of mounting evidence, Liam clung to a sliver of it. He saw the growing cracks in the foundation of their relationship. He saw Sarah's gaze drifting toward a horizon he was supposedly unable to provide, but he needed a final, definitive piece of proof. Observation was no longer enough. It was time for a direct experiment, a catalyst that would force the truth from the shadows. It was a cruel test, perhaps. But love built on a lie was a cruelty far greater. He decided to feign vulnerability, to attack the very pillar upon which Sarah and her mother had built their conditional approval, his financial stability. He would tell her that his job was in jeopardy, that the perfectly adequate life he provided was under threat. He dreaded the conversation, not because he feared her reaction, but because a small, hopeful part of him still prayed he was wrong. He chose a quiet Tuesday evening, a time when they would usually be at their most relaxed. He put on a somber expression as she walked through the door, and when she asked what was wrong, he delivered his carefully rehearsed lines. He spoke of corporate restructuring, of unexpected layoffs in his department, of the very real possibility that his position could be eliminated within the month. He watched her face with the intensity of a scientist observing a chemical reaction, and a reaction he got. First came the socially required performance of concern. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widened. "Oh, Liam, honey, no. That's terrible," she said, wrapping her arms around him. But the embrace was stiff, and it lasted only a moment. When she pulled back, the look of sympathy was already being crowded out by a flicker of something else. Anxiety, pure, undiluted panic. Her first question was not, "Are you okay?" It was not, "How are you feeling?" It was, "What does this mean for us?" The "us," however, quickly revealed its true meaning. Over the next hour, her questions became a rapid-fire interrogation of their financial future. "What about the deposit on the wedding venue? Is that refundable?" she asked, her voice tight. "We were supposed to put a down payment on that house next year. That's obviously out of the question now. My mother was so excited about the honeymoon in Italy." She trailed off, the implication hanging in the air. Each question was a hammer blow to his dwindling hope. He saw no partnership, no sense of, "We'll face this together." He saw only an accountant tallying up her potential losses. He saw a woman watching her meticulously designed lifestyle crumble before her eyes, and her primary emotion was not empathy for his struggle, but resentment that he had allowed it to happen. In that single evening, she built a wall between them, brick by painful brick. She was polite, she was supportive in her words, but her touch was gone. The apartment grew cold. The final, fatal blow came 3 days later. The tension had been unbearable. Sarah was distant, constantly on her phone, speaking in hushed tones with her mother. Liam, feigning stress and needing to clear his head, told her he was going for a long walk. Instead, he circled the block and let himself back into the apartment with his key, silent as a ghost. He wanted to see if she would call her mother the moment she thought he was gone. He didn't have to wait long. He slipped into his small home office and left the door slightly ajar. He heard her footsteps, the click of her phone, and then her voice, laced with a frustration she never showed him. "I don't know what to do, Mom. He's just..." and moping. He leaned closer, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He could hear Eleanor's tinny, agitated voice through the phone, too faint to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Then came Sarah's reply, clear and devastating. "Of course, I'm being supportive, but we have to be realistic. A man his age, losing his job, where does that leave me? I'm 28 years old. I can't start over." There was a pause. Liam held his breath. He could hear Eleanor pressing a point, her voice rising in urgency. He heard her mention the upcoming Starlight Charity Gala, a major society event. And then Sarah spoke the words that ended everything. Her voice was low, a venomous whisper of pure ambition and resentment. "I'm trying, Mom. I know. I'm going to the gala. I have to. I cannot be stuck in a mediocre life forever." Mediocre. Stuck. The words echoed in the silent apartment, in the silent chambers of Liam's heart. It was done. The experiment was over. The hypothesis was confirmed beyond any shadow of a doubt. He felt no rage, no fire of anger. Instead, a profound, glacial coldness spread through him, extinguishing the last embers of his love for her. He was not heartbroken. He was calibrated. He had sought the truth, and the truth had been delivered. He quietly closed the office door, sat down in the darkness, and let the reality wash over him. The woman he was engaged to marry viewed a life with him as a trap. Their entire relationship, from her perspective, was a placeholder, a waiting room until something better came along. And better had a name: Mr. Sterling. The irony was so profound it was almost poetic. She was willing to throw away the real man for a fantasy, unaware that they were one and the same. He sat there for an hour, not moving, as the sun went down and filled the room with shadows. The grief came and went in a single, silent wave. When it receded, it left behind only the hard, unyielding bedrock of purpose. He was no longer a hopeful lover, trying to salvage a romance. He was an architect, and the blueprints for a grand, unforgettable finale were beginning to form in his mind. The lie had served its purpose, confirming a truth more painful than Liam could have imagined. Now, that same capacity for deceit would become his greatest weapon. A few days after the overheard phone call, after letting the cold silence fester in their apartment, Liam orchestrated the beginning of the end. He came home one evening, his face alight with a manufactured joy, waving a letter in his hand. Sarah, who had been treating him with a careful clinical distance, looked up from her phone, her expression wary. "What is it?" she asked, her tone flat. Liam's performance was worthy of a stage. He told her it was all a mistake, a misunderstanding. The company wasn't downsizing his department, they were promoting him. The stress he had shown, the sleepless nights, it had all been for a major project, a test of his capabilities. Not only was his job secure, but he had been given a new title, a significant raise, and a one-time bonus so substantial it made her gasp. The transformation was instantaneous and startling. The icy wall between them didn't just melt, it evaporated in a sudden flash of heat. Her eyes, which had been cold with calculation, now sparkled with what looked like adoration. She threw her arms around him, her laughter bright and joyous. "Oh, Liam, I knew you could do it. I never doubted you for a second. The lie was so blatant, so transparent, it was almost laughable. He hugged her back, his own arms feeling like stone, his mind a silent, cold observer. When she called her mother to share the wonderful news, he could hear Eleanor's shriek of delight through the phone. The prodigal son had returned to financial grace, and the fatted calf was to be slaughtered. That calf, Liam knew, was his bank account. The wedding planning, which had been stalled under the threat of his unemployment, resumed with a vengeance. It was no longer a negotiation, it was a conquest, led by the formidable duo of Sarah and Eleanor. Armed with Liam's newfound wealth, their ambitions, once merely grand, now bordered on the fantastical. They dismissed their previous choices as laughably modest. They now wanted a wedding that would not just be memorable, but would serve as a declaration, a loud, ostentatious announcement of their arrival into a higher social stratum. Their primary target was the venue. They presented Liam with a brochure for the Grand Elysian, a hotel so exclusive it was less a venue and more a landmark, a palace of marble and gold that hosted royalty and billionaires. The rental fee for a single evening was astronomical, a figure designed to make even the wealthy pause. They showed it to him with a kind of hopeful trepidation, expecting him to negotiate them down. Liam barely glanced at the price. He looked at the pictures of the grand ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, the sweeping terrace overlooking the city. It was perfect, a perfect stage for a public execution. "Book it," he said, his voice calm and even. Sarah and Eleanor stared at him, momentarily stunned into silence by the ease of their victory. Their greed, however, quickly smothered their surprise. They took his acquiescence not as a warning sign, but as their due. From that moment on, Liam's credit card became a magical wand. "A $20,000 couture wedding gown? You'll look beautiful in it," he said. "An orchestra flown in from another state? Music is the heart of a celebration," he agreed. "A floral budget that could have purchased a small home? Nothing is too good for you," he would say, his voice a perfect imitation of a devoted fiancé, while his mind made cold, precise calculations. With every extravagant purchase, he felt them tying the knots of their own noose, and he was more than happy to provide the rope. "Let's make this a wedding no one will ever forget," he told Sarah one evening, a dark, double meaning resonating in his words that she was far too ecstatic to notice. While she was gleefully spending his money, Sarah was also diligently pursuing her secret ambition. She was living a double life. By day, she was the blushing bride-to-be, tasting cakes and choosing invitations. By night, she was a shrewd opportunist, hunting bigger game. Her target remained Mr. Sterling. The Starlight Charity Gala was approaching, and she was determined to be there. She pulled every string she could, leveraging her marketing contacts, but an invitation to an event of that caliber was impossible to secure. Undeterred, she launched a different kind of campaign. She began sending carefully crafted emails to the public-facing contact address for Nexus Dynamics' executive office. They were masterpieces of professional flirtation. She presented herself as a dynamic marketing professional, deeply inspired by the visionary leadership of Mr. Five Eyes Sterling, hoping to pique the interest of someone in his inner circle. She attached her professional headshot, one that was exceptionally glamorous, and ended her messages with lines like, "I believe my strategic insights could be of great value to a forward-thinking organization like yours, and I would welcome any opportunity to discuss them further." The irony was sublime. These emails, sent out into the corporate ether in search of a billionaire myth, landed in a single, hyper-secure inbox. An inbox that belonged to Liam Peterson. Late at night, long after Sarah was asleep, dreaming of mansions and couture, Liam would sit in his real office, a vast, minimalist space on the top floor of the Nexus Dynamics tower. The city lights glittered below him like a carpet of fallen stars. On his screen, he would read the words of his fiancée as she tried to betray him with himself. He felt no jealousy, no sting of anger. That part of him was already dead. What he felt was a profound and chilling sense of pity. He saw a woman so utterly lost in her own ambition, so blind to the reality in front of her, that she had become a caricature of greed. His COO and best friend David was the only other person in on the secret. One night, David stood beside him, looking at the latest email from Sarah on the screen. "You know," David said quietly, "you could just call it all off. Expose her quietly. You don't have to go through with this public spectacle." Liam stared out at the city, his face unreadable. "She wants a spectacle, David," he replied, his voice soft but edged with steel. "She wants a grand stage and an audience with Mr. Sterling. It would be rude not to give her exactly what she's asking for." The wedding date drew closer, a deadline for a collision of worlds. Sarah felt supremely confident, believing she was the master of her own destiny, skillfully playing a game of her own design. She had no idea she was merely a pawn in a much grander, more devastating game, one in which she had been checkmated before she even made her first move. The trap was set, the stage lavishly decorated, but Sarah needed one final, decisive push to walk onto it willingly. Liam knew that her greed, while powerful, was still tethered by the sheer momentum of the impending wedding. He needed to present her with what felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a choice so dazzling it would make betraying him feel not like a moral failure, but like a stroke of genius. He decided to give her a glimpse of the phantom she was chasing. A week before the wedding, operating through a secure, anonymous channel, he had his most trusted legal counsel reach out to Sarah. The lawyer, a man whose voice was as smooth and expensive as his suit, introduced himself as a senior member of Mr. Sterling's personal executive team. He told her that her persistent and impressive emails had made their way to the very top. Mr. Sterling, he explained, was a man who admired ambition and audaciousness. He was intrigued. The lawyer arranged a brief, discreet meeting at the exclusive lounge of a five-star hotel, a place where power was the currency of choice. Sarah arrived, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The man who met her was the perfect embodiment of corporate royalty. He was older, distinguished, and exuded an aura of quiet, absolute authority. For 20 minutes, he spoke to her about the world of Nexus Dynamics, a world of private jets, global influence, and limitless possibility. He spoke of Mr. Sterling not as a boss, but as a force of nature, a visionary who was now, in his personal life, seeking a partner who could match his ambition, a queen for his empire. He never made a direct promise. He didn't need to. His words were a carefully woven tapestry of suggestion. "Mr. Sterling has been impressed by your profile, Miss Vance," the man said, his eyes locking onto hers. "He believes a person's past is irrelevant, but their future is everything. He is a man who values those who are decisive, who seize opportunities without hesitation. Complications," he paused, letting the word hang in the air, "are something he has little time for." The message was delivered with surgical precision. The throne was available, but it required an applicant who was unattached, unencumbered, and ready to leap. Sarah left the meeting feeling as though she had been struck by lightning. The world she had been building with Liam, the beautiful wedding, the expensive dress, the comfortable future seemed to shrink, turning drab and provincial in her mind. It was a life, yes, but it was a cage compared to the universe Mr. Sterling was offering. There was no agonizing moral debate in her mind, no tearful struggle between love and ambition. The man she once loved had already been demoted to a simple commodity, and a better offer had just been placed on the table. Her mind, sharp and calculating, saw only a single, glorious path forward. Leaving Liam now wasn't just an option, it was an imperative. She felt a surge of adrenaline, of triumph. She was not a heartless fiancée. She was a brilliant strategist, making the move that would define her life. The morning of the wedding arrived, cloaked in a brilliant, sunlit sky that seemed to mock the darkness of the act about to be committed. In her sprawling suite at the Grand Elysian, paid for by Liam, Sarah awoke feeling not a shred of guilt, but a profound sense of purpose. Her wedding dress, a magnificent creation of lace and silk that had brought tears to her mother's eyes, hung on the back of a door. She glanced at it with the disinterest one might give to an old, outdated piece of clothing. It represented her past. Her future was a blank, glittering page. She picked up her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She felt a brief, clinical pity for Liam. He was a nice man, a stepping stone that had served his purpose. She would be kind, but firm. She would make it quick. Miles away, In an identical suite in the same hotel, Liam was already dressed. His tuxedo felt cool and comfortable on his skin. He was not pacing, not wringing his hands. He was standing by the window, looking out at the waking city, a portrait of unnerving calm. He had given her every opportunity. He had built her a golden bridge to a better life, and he had laid a path of thorns right beside it. All she had to do was choose. He had given her his heart, and he had given her a knife. He was simply waiting to see which one she would pick up. Right on cue, his phone chimed on the bedside table. The sound was not jarring or unwelcome. It was an announcement. The final piece of data had arrived. He walked over, his steps measured and even, and looked at the screen. The words glowed with a cold, digital finality. "I'm sorry, Liam. I can't do this. I've met someone else. He can give me the life that I deserve. I wish you happiness." He read the message once. He didn't need to read it again. It was the period at the end of a long, painful sentence. The words were exactly what he expected. Selfish, dismissive, and utterly devoid of genuine remorse. The phrase, "the life that I deserve," was the key. She saw happiness and luxury not as something to be built, but as something she was owed, a prize to be claimed by any means necessary. He felt a quiet, hollow echo in his chest, the last ghost of the love he had once felt for her. But it was not pain. It was closure. This was the authorization he had been waiting for. The act of betrayal was now complete, signed and delivered by her own hand. It was absolute. It was perfectly timed for maximum cruelty, and it was the greatest mistake of her life. He slipped the phone into his pocket and looked at his reflection in the mirror. His expression was unchanged. The performance was about to begin. He thought of her, somewhere in this very hotel, feeling triumphant, believing she had just executed the perfect escape. "The life you deserve, Sarah," he thought to himself, a cold, thin smile touching his lips for the first time that day. "You are about to get it." For a single, fleeting moment, the ice around Liam's heart cracked. The finality of her words on the screen triggered an involuntary spasm of grief, a phantom pain from a love that was now officially dead. A memory flashed behind his eyes. Sarah, laughing in the sunlight on their first picnic, her head thrown back in genuine, uncalculated joy. The image was so pure, so real, that it felt like a physical blow. The pain was sharp, immense, the last dying nerve of his hope. But then, other images crowded in, colder and harder, extinguishing the warmth of the memory. He saw her face, illuminated by the glow of a magazine, filled with longing for a life he was pretending he couldn't give her. He heard her voice on the phone with her mother, a venomous whisper, branding his life as mediocre. He saw her feigned affection after he announced his bonus, a love that could be switched on and off like a tap. The pain didn't just fade, it transmuted. It was superheated by the fire of 1,000 small betrayals, then flash, forged in the cold reality of her final text. What remained was not the brittle ice of shock, but the hard, unbreakable strength of cold-rolled steel. The grieving was over. The time for calculation had begun. He didn't hesitate. He didn't sit down. He simply tapped his phone and selected his first and only call. It rang once before it was answered. "David," Liam said, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was flat, calm, the voice of a commander giving an order. "Liam, it's your wedding day. You shouldn't be calling me." David's voice came back, warm with concern. "Everything okay?" "It's confirmed," Liam stated, cutting through the pleasantries. She sent the text. "The contingency is now the primary operational plan. It's a go." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When David spoke again, the professional COO was gone, replaced by the worried friend. "Are you all right, man? Seriously." "I've never been better, David," Liam replied, and the chilling truth in his own voice surprised even him. "The diagnosis is confirmed. The disease was terminal. Now we proceed with the surgery. Are the teams on standby?" David, sensing the shift, matched his tone, "Ready and waiting for your command." "What's the new directive?" Liam walked over to the window, looking down at the stream of cars, each one a life heading to a destination. His own destination was now fixed. The wedding, he said, is still happening. The venue, the guests, the orchestra, it all proceeds. But there has been a change of management. The event is no longer a wedding, it's a product launch. And the product we are launching today is the truth. The moment the call ended, a silent, invisible army sprang into motion. At the Nexus Dynamics headquarters, David stepped into a conference room that instantly became a war room. This was what they did best: execute complex, time-sensitive operations with ruthless efficiency. The plan, codenamed Project Overture, had been meticulously crafted weeks ago, a complete set of instructions for turning a high-society wedding into a corporate spectacle. First, the communications team. Within minutes, a carefully worded message was pushed to the mobile devices of every single guest on the list. It read, "Urgent update. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding ceremony of Liam Peterson and Sarah Vance will not be taking place as scheduled. However, in its place, you are cordially invited to be our honored guest at an exclusive, special announcement event hosted by Nexus Dynamics. The time and location remain the Grand Elysian at 3 o'clock. Your presence is of the utmost importance. We look forward to sharing a transformative moment with you." The message was a masterpiece of corporate ambiguity, designed to turn confusion and disappointment into irresistible curiosity. No one would decline. Next, the logistics and events team, led by a woman named Jessica, who could organize a military invasion on a moment's notice, descended upon the Grand Elysian. The hotel's wedding planner, a flustered man named Arthur, met them in the grand ballroom, where he was overseeing the placement of towering floral arrangements. Jessica and her team, all dressed in sharp black suits with Nexus Dynamics pins, looked like they belonged to a different, more serious world. "Mr. Arthur," Jessica began, her voice pleasant but firm, "there has been a change in today's programming. This is no longer a wedding. It is now a Nexus Dynamics corporate keynote event. We have a new floor plan, a new technical writer, and a new schedule." Arthur's jaw dropped as they handed him a tablet displaying the new designs. The romantic, flower-draped altar was to be replaced by a sleek, minimalist stage. A massive 8 Kelvin's LED screen, already on a truck on its way to the hotel, would be installed as the backdrop. The lighting would be shifted from soft and romantic to dramatic, theatrical blues and whites. The orchestra was given a new set list, replacing wedding marches with dramatic, cinematic overtures. The wedding cake was to be moved to a secondary room to be served after the presentation. The hotel staff, initially bewildered, quickly fell in line, swept up by the sheer force of professional competence. While his teams dismantled the facade of his old life and built the stage for his new one, Liam remained in his suite. He was the calm eye of the hurricane. He took off the simple, elegant suit of Liam Peterson, the humble engineer. From a garment bag that had been delivered earlier by David, he removed another suit. This one was different. It was a custom creation of dark charcoal wool, tailored to perfection, exuding power and quiet authority. It was the suit of Mr. Sterling. As he dressed, he was not just changing clothes, he was shedding a skin. He went over the notes for his speech, not memorizing lines, but crystallizing his thoughts. This was not about anger or revenge anymore. It was about balance. It was about a truth that had been suppressed and a lie that had been allowed to fester. Today, he would be the surgeon, and he would cut out the cancer in the most public way imaginable, not just for his own sake, but as a lesson in the true value of a person. By the time he was done, 2 hours had passed. The frantic energy of the takeover had subsided. The ballroom below was no longer a space for a wedding. It was a theater, and the audience was on its way, buzzing with speculation. The pain was gone. The plan was in motion. And the man in the mirror was someone Sarah had never met. He was ready. The moment Sarah hit send, a profound, exhilarating lightness filled her. It was as if she had been holding her breath for years and could finally exhale. The message was a blade, severing the final thread of a life she now viewed as a constricting, mundane prequel to her real story. There was no grief, No remorse, only the intoxicating thrill of a massive gamble paying off. She felt powerful, decisive, the master of her own brilliant destiny. Her first move was not to pack or to reflect, but to share her triumph. She immediately dialed her mother. "I did it, Mom," she said, her voice a triumphant purr. "It's over." On the other end of the line, Eleanor's gasp was pure ecstasy. "Oh, Sarah, my brave, brilliant girl. I knew you had it in you." There were sounds of movement, the clinking of glass. "I'm opening the champagne I had on ice. I had a feeling today was the day our real lives would begin." "Tell me everything." As Sarah recounted the cold, simple text, Eleanor lavished her with praise. She wasn't a daughter who had just brutally broken off an engagement on her wedding day. She was a corporate raider who had just executed a flawless, hostile takeover of her own future. "Good," Eleanor said with satisfaction. "Clean, direct, no messy emotions. That's how a woman of value operates. He was a nice enough starter home, darling, but you were always meant for a palace." They giggled, drunk on a cocktail of relief and ambition, toasting each other over the phone with champagne that Liam's credit card had paid for. They were free. About an hour into their celebration, just as they were beginning to speculate on how soon Mr. Sterling's people would make official contact, there was a sharp, authoritative knock on the door of Sarah's suite. A uniformed hotel bellman stood there, holding a single, heavy envelope on a small silver tray. It was made of thick, cream-colored cardstock, bearing no address, only her name, Miss Sarah Vance, written in elegant, flowing calligraphy. Her heart leaped. This was it. This was the opening salvo of her new life. She took the envelope, her hand trembling slightly, and tore open the wax seal, which was embossed with the unmistakable silver logo of Nexus Dynamics. Inside, a single, engraved card rested. The text was stark and formal. "By special invitation of the Office of the CEO, Nexus Dynamics cordially requests the presence of Miss Sarah Vance and Mrs. Eleanor Vance at an exclusive corporate announcement. The event will be hosted by Mr. C.E.F. Sterling, promptly at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The Grand Elysian, Grand Ballroom." Sarah read it twice, then a third time. She looked at her mother, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning wonder. The time and location were identical to her now canceled wedding. For a normal person, this extraordinary coincidence would have raised 1,000 red flags, a siren of warning that something was terribly wrong. But for Sarah and Eleanor, whose minds were already primed by arrogance and wishful thinking, it could only mean one thing. Their delusion connected the dots into a beautiful, perfect constellation. "Oh my God," Eleanor whispered, her hand flying to her chest. "He knows. Sarah, he must have known this was your wedding day. His representative must have told him you were having second thoughts." Sarah's mind raced, building the fantasy further. "He didn't just invite us," she said, her voice trembling with awe. "He took over the whole event. He bought out our wedding venue, Mom, not as an insult to Liam, but as a gesture to me. A way to replace my old life with a new one, in the very same spot. It's the most powerful, romantic thing I have ever heard." They saw it not as a trap, but as a coronation. The audacity of the move confirmed everything they believed about Mr. Sterling's power and his supposed interest in Sarah. It was a clear signal. He was a man of action, and he was claiming her as his own. The next hour was a whirlwind of triumphant preparation. The magnificent white wedding gown was unceremoniously pushed to the back of the closet. In its place, Sarah selected the dress she had bought for the rehearsal dinner, a stunning, form-fitting sheath of emerald green silk. It was a power dress, a dress that spoke of ambition and seduction, not innocence and vows. As she applied her makeup, she felt like a warrior painting her face for a glorious battle she had already won. Her reflection showed a woman who was confident, radiant, and utterly ruthless. Eleanor, meanwhile, was her general, her strategist. She zipped up Sarah's dress, her hands firm. "Now listen to me, darling," she said, her voice low and serious as she clasped a diamond necklace, a gift from Liam, around Sarah's neck. "When you see him, there is to be no fawning, no gushing. You are not some silly girl. You are his equal. He saw your value and he acted. You are the prize he just won. Let him come to you. Be brilliant, be charming, but be aloof. Make him understand that he didn't just acquire an asset, he entered into a partnership. Their conversation was a giddy blueprint of their future reign. They spoke of the society columns that would feature Sarah's picture, the boards she would sit on, the envious faces of all the women they had ever known. They were no longer just Sarah and Eleanor Vance from a respectable but unremarkable suburb. They were about to become titans, matriarchs of a new dynasty. Finally, they were ready. They stood before the full-length mirror, a portrait of polished, predatory ambition. They were a team, a mother and daughter duo who had, in their minds, just pulled off the greatest social coup of the century. They felt invincible, untouchable, bathed in the golden glow of their imminent future. With a final, satisfied glance at their reflections, they opened the door to their suite and stepped out, their high heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. They walked towards the elevator, towards the grand ballroom, towards what they believed was a throne. The bait, so beautifully wrapped in their own vanity, had been taken completely, and the jaws of the trap were beginning to close. The grand ballroom of the Elysian was a breathtaking symphony of opulence. It was everything Sarah and Eleanor had dreamed of, and more. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of guests dressed in exquisitely tailored suits and shimmering evening gowns. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 white roses and the expensive perfume of the city's elite. An orchestra, perched on a balcony, played a score that was not soft or romantic, but grand and cinematic, filling the vast space with a palpable sense of anticipation. Sarah and Eleanor paused at the magnificent arched entrance, taking it all in, their faces glowing with a sense of triumphant arrival. This was not a wedding, this was a coronation, and they were the royalty. Their deluded interpretation of the invitation had prepared them for a spectacle, but this exceeded all expectations. The evidence of their victory was everywhere. On elegant digital screens, cleverly integrated between the massive floral displays, the silver logo of Nexus Dynamics pulsed with a soft, confident light. It was on the cocktail napkins, on the lapel pins of the impeccably dressed staff, and on the large banner hanging discreetly behind the stage. To Sarah, it was the ultimate power move. Mr. Sterling hadn't just invited her into his world. He had rebranded her old one, stamping his ownership on the very day she was meant to commit to a lesser man. "Look at this, Mother," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with exhilaration. He didn't leave a single detail to chance. "This is a statement." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's arm, her eyes sweeping the room, identifying faces from the society pages. "Of course it is, darling," she purred. "This is how real power operates." Liam planned a pleasant little party. Mr. Sterling is launching a dynasty, with you at his side. They began to move through the crowd, a confident, gliding pair. They felt the weight of hundreds of eyes turning towards them, and they mistook the guests' confused curiosity for awe. They imagined the whispers that must be flying through the room. "That's her. That's the one. The woman who captivated the great Mr. Sterling." In their minds, they were no longer guests. They were the main attraction. They accepted glasses of champagne from a passing waiter, their movements practiced and regal. They scanned the room, searching for the man of the hour. They looked for a figure that would match the myth, someone older perhaps, with the steely gray hair and commanding presence of a titan. Every distinguished man they saw was a potential candidate, a possibility that sent a fresh thrill through them. But then, through a gap in the crowd, Sarah saw a sight that made the champagne turn sour in her stomach. Standing near a marble pillar were John and Mary Peterson, Liam's parents. They were simple, kind people, a retired teacher and a librarian who had always treated Sarah with a gentle, if slightly bewildered, affection. Today, however, their faces held a look she had never seen before. They were not angry, not yelling, not making a scene. It was something far worse. As their eyes met Sarah's, she saw a look of such profound, quiet contempt and staggering disappointment that it felt like a physical slap. There was no hatred in their eyes, only a deep, sorrowful judgment, the look of two decent people witnessing an act of unforgivable cruelty. They knew. She didn't know how, but it was clear they knew what she had done to their son. A cold prickle of unease traced its way up Sarah's spine. What were they doing here? If this was Mr. Sterling's event, a grand gesture for her, why would Liam's parents be on the guest list? The perfect, glittering narrative she had constructed in her mind suddenly developed a hairline crack. She faltered for a moment, the confident smile tightening on her face. Eleanor, noticing her daughter's hesitation, followed her gaze. She saw the Petersons and her lips thinned into a dismissive sneer. "Pay them no mind," she whispered fiercely into Sarah's ear. "They're irrelevant. Of course they're bitter. Their meal ticket just walked out the door. Don't you dare let them ruin this moment. Straighten your back. You are the queen in this room. Act like it." Eleanor's words were the bracing tonic Sarah needed. She pushed the image of the Petersons' faces from her mind, classifying it as an unpleasant, but ultimately insignificant, piece of data. Her mother was right. This was her day. This was her victory. She would not let the sad, judgmental faces of two simple people tarnish it. She took another sip of champagne, letting the bubbles and the alcohol fortify her resolve. She and her mother continued their slow, deliberate path through the ballroom, their eyes once again scanning for the prize. The room was now filled to capacity. The low hum of conversation was a powerful, intoxicating sound. It was the sound of money, of influence, of the world she had sacrificed everything to join. The orchestra's music swelled and then softened. The lights in the grand ballroom began to dim, leaving only the spotlights on the stage, which was still conspicuously empty. A hush fell over the crowd. The moment was approaching. Sarah's heart began to beat faster, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was it. Mr. Sterling was about to make his entrance, to reveal himself to the world, and to her. She found a position near the front of the crowd, her mother a protective, proud presence at her side. She smoothed down her emerald dress, took a deep breath, and composed her features into a look of radiant, welcoming grace. She was ready for her new life to begin. The unease she had felt moments before was forgotten, buried beneath an avalanche of triumphant ambition. She stood there, bathed in the theatrical lights, feeling the eyes of the world upon her, a queen awaiting the arrival of her king, utterly and blissfully unaware that she was not at a coronation, but a public sacrifice. The stage was set, the audience was silent, and the executioner was about to appear. The orchestra faded into silence. The low hum of 100 conversations died away, replaced by a thick, expectant hush. Every light in the grand ballroom extinguished, plunging the opulent space into a dramatic, breath-stealing darkness. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment she had been waiting for. A single, brilliant white spotlight cut through the black, illuminating the center of the stage. The air crackled with anticipation. Into this circle of light, a lone figure walked from the wings, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. Sarah leaned forward, her entire being focused on the stage, ready to greet her king. The silhouette was tall and lean, the cut of his suit perfect. But as he stepped fully into the light, a gasp caught in Sarah's throat. Her mind reeled, refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. It was not an older, distinguished tycoon. It was not a mysterious, handsome stranger. It was Liam. But it was a version of Liam she had never seen. A version she couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams. Gone was the gentle, unassuming software engineer. The man on the stage stood with an unshakable, grounded stillness. His simple, off-the-rack suit had been replaced by a dark, exquisitely tailored masterpiece that seemed molded to his frame. His posture was no longer relaxed and easygoing. It was erect, commanding. He wasn't looking at his shoes or shuffling nervously. He was surveying the entire room, his gaze sweeping over the audience with a calm, absolute authority that was utterly terrifying. His face, usually open and warm, was a mask of cold, unreadable composure. Sarah's mind scrambled for an explanation. What was he doing? Was this some pathetic, grand gesture? A desperate, public attempt to win her back? A wave of hot embarrassment washed over her, mixed with a surge of angry pity. How dare he ruin this moment, her moment, with his pedestrian drama? Beside her, Eleanor let out a hiss of pure venom. "What in God's name does that pathetic boy think he's doing?" she whispered furiously. Security should throw him out. Liam stepped up to the sleek, modern lectern that now stood where the altar should have been. He adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. When he spoke, his voice was not the warm, gentle tone she knew. It was crisp, clear, and amplified, carrying a resonance of pure command that held every person in the room captive. "Good afternoon," he began. "And thank you all for being here. I know there has been some confusion about the nature of today's event. I'd like to clear that up. Welcome to this special announcement from Nexus Dynamics." A ripple of shock and confusion went through the crowd. The name, spoken with such authority from Liam's lips, was a profound disconnect, a sentence that made no sense. Sarah felt a jolt, a sickening lurch in her stomach. Why was he saying that? What was happening? Before the main announcement, Liam continued, his voice steady and even. "I'd like to tell you a short story, a parable of sorts. It's about a man who built a kingdom. He had everything he could ever want: wealth, power, success. But he wanted to find one thing that his money could not buy. A love that was genuine. A partner who would value the man, not the kingdom." He paused, letting the words sink in. The business leaders in the audience leaned forward, intrigued. Liam's family and friends exchanged bewildered glances. Sarah felt a cold dread begin to creep up her spine. "So this man," Liam went on, his eyes scanning the crowd, created a test. He built a second life for himself, a simple, humble life. He presented himself to the world as an ordinary man with an ordinary job to see if he could find a woman who would love him for who he was and not for what he had. The story was becoming horribly, terrifyingly familiar. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She could feel her mother stiffen beside her. This couldn't be happening. "He thought he had found her," Liam said, a note of something that might have been sadness entering his voice. "He fell in love. He asked her to marry him, and she said yes. He planned to give her his entire kingdom, to reveal the truth after they were wed, a testament to their true love. They planned their wedding in this very ballroom." He gestured around the magnificent room. The dread in Sarah's stomach was now a block of ice. She felt dizzy, the faces in the crowd blurring at the edges. But the woman's heart was divided, Liam said, his voice hardening. The simple life with the simple man was not enough. She dreamed of something more. She became obsessed with a fantasy, a ghost of wealth and power. She became captivated by the myth of the reclusive CEO of Nexus Dynamics, a man known as Mr. Sterling. He let the name hang in the air. Then he did the unthinkable. His eyes, cold and direct, found hers in the crowd. He was looking right at her. "In fact," he said, his voice dropping to a level of chilling intimacy that everyone could hear, "this morning, on what was supposed to be our wedding day, she sent the man a text message, breaking his heart and canceling their future. All so she could be free to pursue the CEO of Nexus Dynamics." Time seemed to stop. The air was sucked out of the room. And then, the massive screen behind Liam, which had been displaying the Nexus logo, flickered to life. Displayed there, in letters 10 feet high for the entire world to see, were the words from her own phone. "I'm sorry, Liam. I can't do this. I've met someone else. He can give me the life that I deserve. I wish you happiness." A collective, horrified gasp swept through the ballroom. Hundreds of faces turned to stare at Sarah, their expressions a mixture of shock, pity, and disgust. The screen had become a colossal monument to her greed and cruelty. Her world tilted on its axis. Her legs gave way, and she had to grab her mother's arm to keep from collapsing. Eleanor herself was as white as a sheet, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream. Liam let the image burn into the minds of the audience for a long, torturous moment. Then, he delivered the final, devastating blow. His voice was calm, clear, and utterly final. "A tragic and profound irony," he said, the microphone catching every nuance of his cold, precise words. "The greatest miscalculation of her life, because, you see, what she so desperately failed to understand." He paused, holding the entire room, the entire world, in the palm of his hand, is that I, Liam Peterson, am Mr. Sterling. For a full 5 seconds, there was absolute, stunned silence. The only sound was the frantic, panicked pounding of blood in Sarah's ears. Then, the room exploded. Not with applause, but with a tidal wave of sound gasps, frantic whispers, shocked exclamations. The truth detonated in the center of the ballroom, and Sarah and her mother were at ground zero. Every dream of power, every fantasy of wealth, every ounce of their arrogant pride was incinerated in that single, horrifying moment of public revelation. They were naked, exposed, and utterly destroyed, trapped in the spotlight of the very stage they had so desperately wanted to command. The single sentence, "I am Mr. Sterling," did not just detonate in the ballroom, it created a shockwave that flattened Sarah and Eleanor's entire world, leaving nothing but the smoldering ashes of their ambition. For a long, horrifying moment, Sarah's mind simply ceased to function. The roaring sound in her ears was the sound of her own blood, a frantic, panicked surf pounding against the inside of her skull. The hundreds of faces in the crowd blurred into a single, monstrous entity, a wall of judgment and morbid fascination. The giant screen behind Liam, still displaying her own damning words, was a cruel, unblinking god of her own making, broadcasting her shame to the heavens. Her skin felt hot, then ice cold. The beautiful emerald dress, which moments ago had felt like a suit of armor for her conquest, now felt like a garish costume for a fool, clinging to her skin with the weight of her humiliation. It was Eleanor who moved first. Her face, a grotesque mask of horror and disbelief, contorted with a primal urge for escape. She grabbed Sarah's arm, her manicured nails digging into her flesh like claws. "We have to go," she hissed, her voice a raw, ragged sound. "Now." The words broke Sarah's paralysis. She began to move, her legs stiff and uncooperative, like a marionette with its strings cut. Their retreat was not a walk, it was a gauntlet. The crowd, as if by some unspoken signal, parted for them, creating a wide, merciless aisle leading to the exit. No one touched them, no one spoke to them, but the silence was filled with the deafening roar of whispers, the click and flash of 100 smartphone cameras, capturing their walk of shame for digital eternity. Every stare was a physical blow. She saw pity in some faces, disgust in others, and in the eyes of the city's elite, the very people they had been so desperate to impress, she saw a cold, dismissive amusement. They were not witnessing a tragedy. They were witnessing a satisfying, if somewhat vulgar, piece of live entertainment. As they reached the grand entrance, Sarah dared one last, tormented look back. Liam was still on the stage, but he wasn't looking at them. He was no longer performing. He was surrounded by a group of sharply dressed executives, his actual team, and he was speaking to them with a calm, focused energy. He had already moved on. The execution was over, and he was back to the business of running his kingdom. In that moment, Sarah understood the most devastating truth of all. To him, she was no longer even an afterthought. She was a problem that had been solved, an error that had been corrected. She was nothing. The heavy ballroom doors swung shut behind them, closing them off from the world they had so desperately wanted, and sealing them into the sudden, suffocating silence of their own ruin. The fallout was not swift. It was a slow, agonizing social obliteration. By the time they made it back to their car, the story was already beginning to break online. By that evening, it was a global phenomenon. The video clips of their faces at the moment of the reveal, captured from a dozen different angles, went viral. The hashtag number Sterling Revenge was trending worldwide. The screenshot of her text message became a meme, a universal symbol for greed and betrayal. They were no longer people. They were a cautionary tale, a punchline. The consequences were as brutal as they were immediate. Sarah was fired from her marketing job the next morning via a cold, 2-sentence email citing gross reputational misconduct. Eleanor was quietly informed that her membership at the country club had been indefinitely suspended. The friends who had once envied her proximity to Liam now refused to answer her calls. They were social pariahs, marooned on an island of their own making, the silence of their perfectly decorated suburban home now a prison. In stark, stunning contrast, Liam's life ascended to a new stratosphere, the myth of the reclusive Mr. Sterling was gone, replaced by the reality of Liam Peterson, a man who was not only a brilliant titan of industry, but also a figure of almost legendary integrity. He was on the cover of Forbes, Wired, and even Time magazine. His story was irresistible. The billionaire who had gone undercover to find true love and had surgically exposed a deception of epic proportions. He handled his newfound fame with the same quiet, calculated grace he had applied to his revenge. He gave only one brief interview. He did not speak ill of Sarah. When the journalist asked if he had any regrets, his answer was measured and profound. "My only regret," he said, "is that I was forced to prove a truth that should have been self-evident. Integrity, both in business and in our personal lives, is the only asset that truly matters." Today's event was not an act of revenge. It was a necessary and public correction of the record. His company's stock soared. He was hailed as a new kind of leader, decisive, brilliant, and unyieldingly principled. Weeks later, long after the noise had faded, Liam stood in his office, looking out at the city lights. David came in and stood beside him, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. "To the truth," David said, handing him a glass. Liam took a slow sip. The warmth of the liquid, a stark contrast to the cold satisfaction he had felt on that day. "Was it worth it?" David asked quietly. Liam was silent for a long moment, watching the endless flow of traffic below. "I don't think of it in terms of worth," he finally replied. "There was no joy in it, David. There was no victory. There was only resolution. The lie she was living, the lie she was trying to pull me into, it was a cancer. It was a critical flaw in the system. And I had a choice. Let it corrupt everything, or cut it out. I chose to cut it out." He swirled the whiskey in his glass. "I didn't lose a fiancé in that ballroom. I lost an illusion. A very expensive, very convincing illusion. And in return, I got my life back. A real life, where I don't have to hide who I am." He had paid an astronomical price for a wedding that never happened, but he now considered it the best investment he had ever made. It was the price of his freedom. The ashes of greed that had once littered his life had been swept away, leaving behind a clean, solid foundation upon which he could finally begin to build something real. Several months passed. The seasons changed, and the noise that had erupted around Liam's life slowly faded, like the echo of a distant storm. The story of the billionaire's revenge became a piece of internet lore, a modern fable whispered in boardrooms and on gossip forums. For Liam, however, it was simply the end of a chapter. He now lived his life, not as 2 separate people, but as one integrated whole. He was Liam Peterson, the man who still enjoyed the quiet satisfaction of writing elegant code, and he was Mr. Sterling, the CEO who guided a global empire. He had moved from his modest apartment, but his new home, a stunning penthouse overlooking the city, was filled not with ostentatious displays of wealth, but with books, comfortable furniture, and the quiet air of a man at peace with himself. The anger was gone, the need for retribution was satisfied. What remained was a serene, unshakable calm. He had faced the truth of his life, and in doing so, had found a profound sense of freedom. One cool autumn afternoon, his assistant brought him a small stack of mail. Tucked between corporate reports and investment summaries was a single, hand-addressed envelope. It was a personal letter, an analog artifact in his digital world. The return address was from the quiet, suburban town where Sarah's parents lived. The handwriting was neat and steady. It was from her father, a man Liam had only ever known as a quiet, peripheral figure, completely overshadowed by his wife's overbearing presence. Curious, Liam opened it. The letter was short, written on simple, dignified stationery. It began with a sincere, heartfelt apology for the profound humiliation and pain his daughter and wife had caused. He made no excuses for their behavior, calling it a catastrophic failure of character for which he felt a deep, personal shame. But it was the second paragraph that made Liam put the letter down, his mind reeling with a revelation far more shocking than his own. "There is something I feel you must know, Mr. Peterson," the letter read. I have known who you really are for the past 4 years. I attended a technology conference in San Francisco, an event for industry insiders. You were there to accept a prestigious award for innovation, presented under a professional pseudonym you used in your early days. I saw you on stage, I heard your speech. I knew you were the mind behind Nexus Dynamics. When my daughter brought you home for the first time, I recognized you instantly. I chose to remain silent. I saw in you a decent, honorable man, and it was my foolish, fatherly hope that my daughter would have the wisdom and grace to see the same thing. I hoped she would fall in love with Liam Peterson, the kind and brilliant man, and that one day you would choose to share your kingdom with her as a gift, not as a prize she had won. My silence was my own test for her, a test of her heart. She failed, Mr. Peterson. She failed in a way that is, for a father, a source of unending sorrow. You did not lose a fiancé that day. You merely confirmed a truth that I, to my shame, had been watching unfold for years. Liam read the letter again, a wave of complex emotions washing over him. It wasn't anger or shock. It was a profound sense of connection. He realized he had never been the sole director of this elaborate play. There had been another observer in the audience, a quiet, hopeful man who was praying for a different ending. The entire ordeal was reframed. It wasn't just his personal test of a lover's loyalty. It was a father's tragic confirmation of his own daughter's soul. Justice, he now understood, wasn't merely about the satisfaction of revenge. It was about the truth, in all its painful and complicated glory, finally being brought into the light. The humiliation Sarah and Eleanor had suffered was not something he had inflicted upon them. It was a fate they had authored themselves, word by painful word, choice by greedy choice. He stood and walked to the vast window of his office, looking down at the city below. He felt a sense of closure so complete it was almost physical. He had not destroyed a life. He had simply stepped away from a lie, allowing it to collapse under the weight of its own emptiness. The world was full of facades, of people pretending to be something they were not. But it was also full of quiet observers, like Sarah's father, people who see beyond the surface, who wait and watch, hoping for the best in us. And so, let this be the lesson from Liam's story. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured for too long, for in their quiet, they are not weak. They are observing, calculating, and waiting for the precise moment to reclaim their truth. And when they finally choose to speak, their words can reshape the world. And never, ever, judge a book by its cover. For in your haste, you may just be discarding a priceless first edition and proving nothing but the poverty of your own judgment. Thank you for listening to Liam's story. Every family holds a secret, and every heart holds a scar. Join us for our next story, where a forgotten last will and testament reveals a betrayal far more bitter than death itself. We will see you then.